Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Welcome to Empty Cloud. There are some new folks here and some old friends as well. Welcome everybody, and welcome to everybody on the live stream. I arrived a couple weeks ago, and here to Empty Cloud, and Venerable Siddhasa and I assume is very gracious and kind, allowed me to visit their monastery. Been taking good care of me, along with Summoner Metiko, and we also have a long-term resident, Daniel, who's been also helping out a lot. And one of the things that I've noticed is over time, we have conversations from time to time, and I noticed that my mind feels more at ease with talking about things going on in our lives, things we're planning in the future, concerns we might have about our practice, or how to best use our time as monastics and navigate this world we live in. And this is something that didn't just come about immediately. This is something that it's the first day I got here, for example. It's not like hello and hi, welcome, nice to meet you, and you immediately start talking about like, boy, this really difficult thing I'm dealing with, and what do you think? And it doesn't usually work that way. Sometimes it does in our lives. We can meet somebody we've never met, and maybe we feel a strong kinship and we can immediately connect with. But usually these things take a little bit of time. And I was thinking, well, what are the conditions for that to come about? Is it just time? Well, time may be part of it, but it's also a willingness on parties to establish certain behaviors. And in our monastic tradition, we have a lot of formalities, as well as various rules and precepts that the monks and monastics follow, and this helps, right? For example, we have rules against, for example, not slandering another, bhikkhu, or we're not, supposed to lie or anything like that. And what those precepts do is they provide sort of a boundary of conduct, so that we know, oh, okay, this, well, for example, lying is not just inappropriate for a monastic, but it also disturbs the or um, uh, it it makes the connections we have amongst each other either frayed or even break. Um, and and so all the various forms that we have are designed to help us establish good connections so that trust can build over time, so we can have more meaningful dialogue and exchanges with each other. And of course, it's monastics. While we have a very particular role and life that we see in the monastery, um, the Buddha didn't just teach monastics; he also taught lay people that didn't take a renunciant form, and gave lay people a set of boundaries in order to have a safe and um, um, meaningful life amongst themselves and others. And and so he offered lay people what are called the Five Precepts. These are um, ways of living amongst each other in a way that helps establish connections between each other and allows us to live simply and harmoniously with each other. Um, you may have heard of these, and these are sometimes so simple that it sometimes we can kind of overlook them because they look it seems almost too simple, but it's worth going over and thinking about how these encouragements from the Buddha in order to live a more simple life can help us be more at ease and more peaceful. So the first precept that he encouraged lay people to follow is the precept around not taking the life of another creature. Um, and so we restrain ourselves from um, um, well, depriving another being of their life. And we do this out of a sense of imagining ourselves if we were on the other end of this. You know? So if we're going to live amongst each other, uh, it it's hard for us to live amongst the same world if one being is um, taking our lives, right? And it also provokes, if there's a threat of taking life, it provokes a lot of fear and anxiety. And so by establishing this precept for ourselves so that we say, okay, I'm not going to take the life of another creature, even if this other, creature or being is really annoying or irritating or somebody I don't like or something I don't like. I'm not going to take that life. I'm going to give that creature a sense of safety, a sense of trust that I'm not going to go. I'm not going to do that. And the second precept is around to not steal, to not take possessions that somebody else uh, assumes as theirs. And so, similarly, it's a way of developing a sense of trust among other beings that when they're not looking, we're not going to go out and take their belongings. We're not going to swindle them. We're not going to deprive them of things that they've worked for. And again, it's a sense of, for ourselves, we imagine ourselves, if somebody else were to take our belongings, things that we work for, things that we depend on, that would provoke a lot of fear and anxiety. And so we give other beings this sense of trust and safety. The third precept the Buddha established, well, often gets translates as to not commit sexual misconduct. And probably the simplest way of describing this is basically to not take advantage of somebody sexually. More extreme example could be like sexual assault or rape, but also includes things like, if you made an agreement with somebody else to be monogamous, to uphold that agreement, to not break that agreement. And again, if we imagine ourselves, if somebody else, let's say, were to assault us or to break agreement, that would provoke a lot of, anger and fear, and a lot of pain and grief. And so when we take on this, I'm going to hold this precept, even again, no matter what the conditions are, what we're doing is we're giving other beings around us a sense of safety and trust. Fourth precept the Buddha encourages lay followers is the precept around to not lie. And again, this is possibly one that the first four precepts, maybe one that people that are, let's say, in our kind of more modern society, people often will say things just to take sort of get an advantage over somebody else, or to sort of deceive another person, to sort of get an advantage. Or sometimes we may say things not necessarily to take advantage of others, but maybe we just say we're often called white lies, not to, let's say, cause a disturbance or to upset somebody. So we say things that are not true in order to not hurt their feelings, for example. But ultimately, what all these things do is they break down trust. When we deceive others, when we lie, what that ultimately does is that it prevents people from being able to communicate in an honest way with each other. We don't really know where the person's really at if the person has a history of lying. And so we can take on this precept as a way of offering a sense of trust and safety to others, that, even if I'm, even if I'm frustrated, if I'm angry, even if I don't like you, even if I feel awkward, that, I'm going to make sure that I'm honest and upfront with you. And again, over time, what this does is it gives people, other beings, a sense of safety and trust. And the last precept that the Buddha offered was the precept around not taking intoxicants. And the main reason for this precept is that if we take enough intoxicants that make it difficult to, we sort of diminish our ability to restrain ourselves, it makes it much more easy that we'll break the first 4 precepts. We'll have a tendency to not be aware of what we're doing. We'll have a tendency to not have that sort of sense of, how do you say, kind of shame or compunction around what's appropriate around others. And yeah, it makes it much more easy that, we'll hurt somebody else, or not even be aware of what we're doing until the next day, and then we find out that, a lot of commotion and hurt was caused by us. So these are the precepts that the Buddha offered the lay people as a means of living a life that's peaceful and harmonious with others, and really offering other beings around us a really profound sense of safety, right? I think, I think most of us, if live long enough, we'll and we ask ourselves, what are things that are important to us? Maybe early in life you might, it's like, oh, okay, maybe you like candy or toys, and then, when you get a little bit older, you're like going out with friends and partying. But after a while, as we get a little more mature, we start to understand that, we kind of think about, well, what's like really important? It's like, oh wow, like just really basic level, having like some sense of physical safety and people that we can count on is really, really important. And so if we're willing to take on these precepts, what we're doing is we're offering the people around us a profound sense of safety and somebody that they can trust. And what it also can do is it also can give yourself a recognition that, oh, this being here is somebody I can trust too. One of the things that as I talk to different people and listen to, what people are thinking about, what their concerns are, I often hear people talk about like kind of a sense of kind of a lack of hope, lack of confidence, kind of just a sense of like not sure if anybody I can trust, but and that's understandable, especially if we're in situations where maybe quite rightly there is a lot of chaos and confusion and people acting out in very unskillful and hurtful ways. It can be pretty demoralizing. And so if we can take on a set of principled ways of living our life to give other people a sense of trust around ourselves, and we can commit to these things for periods of time, we ourselves will get a sense of, oh, this being can hold, can maintain something that's difficult, maintain something that's noble, even in the face of unease that's going around them. And so this gives not only a sense of trust to others, but it gives a sense of trust to ourselves. And so, and then of course, for myself, one of the great benefits I see from that sense of trust when we ourselves are doing our best to keep precepts, and we're spending time with others that are keeping precepts, and we're offering goodwill to others, and they're often goodwill to ourselves. It allows people to start connecting with each other in much more meaningful ways that make that brings a lot of happiness and joy, and allows our minds to be more at ease, more settled. So I hope that what I've shared maybe can consider what I've said today. These things. The Buddha very much encouraged his followers to take on, to reflect on, to consider. And I know for myself, especially before I was a monk, these are something I very much valued and brought a lot of meaning from my own life. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Namayang Dhammakataya Sarukarang Naramase Sadhu 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 Anumodami. Thank you. And if there's any questions, this is the time when you can ask questions.
I don't have questions, just a comment. Thank you so much, Bhante. I think for me was kind of first time that I heard the precepts in such a beautiful way, talking about the safety and trust. That makes a lot of sense and clarity in my mind, and how each precept is related to each other, and so beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, go ahead.
First, thank you for opening your home to all of us. I'm very grateful that we have the opportunity to listen to your words of wisdom, your compassion, your kindness. Can I ask a question? Just was there a singular event that, because I was listening to everything you said, and I love hearing your perspective, but was there a singular event that made you want to become, I guess we call them monastic or a monk? Was it something over time, or was it one singular event? And what do you find not only with yourself, but also with others? How did you arrive at that?
Sure. So the question is, was there a singular event that transpired that where we became a monk? Is that correct? And then the sort of what was around, what were the circumstances around that?
Yeah, because I know you said you're visiting from somewhere, another state, I'm guessing. But at what point did it seem like this is the path that you want to take? And was there a singular event, or was it really the culmination of many experiences over time?
So was it a singular event, or was it the culmination of many experiences over time? Okay. So so I guess maybe that may be a good question for both of us to answer. I'll go first. So for myself, it was both. There was a very important moment in my life, and that actually was my father passing away. That probably maybe was the most kind of important event that kind of removed me. But it's also the case that there wasn't any one single event. So I was already a practicing lay Buddhist for a number of years. I actually didn't know too much, or didn't know anything about monasticism, but I was becoming increasingly interested in practicing meditation and interested in studying the Buddhist teachings and applying them. and seeing how they can actually directly help the life and help my life and others in a way that other things I did in my life couldn't really compare to. So, and there was a lot of things. There wasn't any one thing. If I could try to maybe identify a few of those that were important, I would say probably the teachings on generosity for me was a very important one because I remember reading an essay by a lay Buddhist talking about the importance of generosity, and I knew what it was, but the way that I learned it through my family and culture and society it was almost kind of like you do it because you're supposed to do it because the right thing, or you do it because almost like on a martyr sort of way, right? Um, and so whenever I had done generosity before, it was like, okay, I guess I'll do this, and because it'll make you feel better, right? But I'd rather do something else, or I'd rather keep my money or whatever. That I never had this kind of sense of it. Just always felt like a bit of like a sacrifice, right? So when I was reading these teachings on generosity, I was like, wow, okay, the Buddha really encouraged this, and I'm not sure why, because whenever I tried this, kind of doesn't really feel too good, but I was very inspired by what was being encouraged. So I decided, okay, I'm just gonna start giving whenever I can. At the time, I was living the West Coast, and so I just there where I was living in a larger city, so there were a lot of people, particularly panhandlers around, and but there were other situations, and so I just okay, if somebody's asking for something, I just give them something, and you know, for a while it didn't seem like it. I was like, okay, I'm just kind of doing stuff, and I actually don't feel particularly good. And in fact, I remember one time, somebody asked me for a transit card to go somewhere, and I was a little suspicious. I was like, oh, okay, I'll get you a transit card. So I got a transit card, and took the transit card, and then he like pretended to go inside the aisle with the card, but he didn't, and then he just kind of left. And I saw this, and I was like so angry, right? And I started yelling. I started chasing and yelling at him, and he's he's running away and yelling at me, and I'm like right after yelling at him, and I remember like after all that, I remember thinking, I'm like whoa, like what did I just do? Like, but so I'll give you that's kind of the extent of. I was really like kind of trying, just trying it, right? So, and I was, it wasn't, it didn't really seem like I was going anywhere. But I remember, one day, it was probably like 2 or 3 weeks into this experiment. I remember going somewhere, and it was cold, about to rain. I had an umbrella with me, and I was at the corner of an intersection. I was standing there, and it started to drizzle. And there was a lady next to me, and I wasn't thinking about it. I just opened my umbrella and I just put it over her, right? And she turned to me. I didn't know her. She didn't know me. She turned to me, and she gave me this like really like this smile, and then she hugged me, and then she walked off. And I was kind of dumbstruck by that. Um, and and then I realized, like, it's like, oh, like it was actually quite enjoyable, that experience. And the other person, I could tell they felt it was a positive experience for them, and it wasn't complicated, and I wasn't thinking about it. And I started to go, oh, if I don't think about it and I just have fun, oh, okay, that's what they mean by giving. Oh, and so I started to click, it started to click. Um, so that's like one example of me kind of exploring Buddha's teachings where it was just like started like, oh my God, this is like, I never learned this. And why didn't anybody tell me this? And, like, whoa, this is so cool, like, and so and there are other things, for example, with the precepts or with meditation or with, there's many, many other things that I learned through Buddhist practice. And all these things over time, I became more and more compelled to practice. And eventually, I was reading the text here, talk about, bhikkhu is this, bhikkhu is that. What's a bhikkhu? So I just started, well, what's this monastic thing all about? So anyway, that was my experience. Venerable Siddhasta, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, for me there wasn't any one big trigger. It was more just that for many years I had been practicing different kinds of spirituality, studying different spiritual traditions, and I was particularly looking for traditions that offered practical ways of training the mind, so that the mind can experience happiness and serenity and clarity, and so that the mind can start to develop some kind of direct understanding of reality. So again, I experimented with many different spiritual traditions, but then when I started practicing Buddhism, it was like, oh, this is what I was looking for. Like this is offering exactly what I was looking for. So I practiced Buddhism as a layperson for about 3 years, and during that time, I just experienced so much personal development, so much increase in happiness and wisdom and peacefulness of mind and gentleness that I was like, okay, this is really, really working, and I want to really go deeply into this. So what's the way that one gets maximum benefit from this kind of practice? And naturally, it's monastic life. So you want to really commit your entire life to practicing Buddhism as intensely and completely as possible, and that's what monastic life is for. So for me, it was very natural that this was, my mind started going in the direction of becoming a monk, actually within a couple of years of when I started practicing Buddhism. So I actually started when I was 20. I went to a monastery when I was 20, and that's been my entire adult life. So I've always spent it living in Buddhist monasteries in one place or another.
Can I ask you one follow-up question? About a month and a half ago, I was here, and you said, I can't even believe where I was 5 years ago. I didn't want to think about it. Do you think you're going to think the same thing 5 years from now?
I hope
you're
so.
going to grow that much more?
Oh gosh, I hope so. Yeah. Well, that's the thing about this practice. You change very quickly. So this is something really noticeable. Actually, if you have non-Buddhist friends, then you'll notice 5 years from now you will be a lot different than you are now, but your friends will be maybe a little bit different than now, but not dramatically. But this practice, because we have the willingness to change absolutely anything about the mind, which is obstructing our wisdom, our compassion, our happiness. We're willing to change anything that's an obstacle to those things, right down to our self-identity. Whatever we hold most dear about our mind, we're willing to change it if we discover it's a problem. Whereas the average person who's not practicing Buddhism, there's things about their mind that they're just not willing to change. No matter how much pain and difficulty it causes them, they're not willing to change that. Because they're too attached to that self-identity or that way of thinking or behaving. So yeah, naturally we change, and we can change very quickly if we're willing to. So yeah, I've made a lot of progress in the last 5 years, and I hope I make a lot of progress in the next 5 years.
I have a question about what you said about the precepts. You talked a lot about how your precepts protect the people around you and lead to a sense of safety. And being on the receiving end of that on a regular basis, I really appreciate that. But I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about how my precepts protect myself, particularly in the mind, but just in general as well.
Sure. Do you want?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. So the question was, could you share a little bit more about how precepts protect our own minds? Right. So the one of the things that the Buddha was very clear about, particularly the first four precepts, was that it's basically not. If we act out on these things, or even start the intention is starting to formulate, that's an unwholesome, unskillful intention. And so, as Buddhist practitioners, we're encouraged by the Buddha to, those things that are unskillful, that are unwholesome, to abandon those things because they lead to lead to pain, they lead to affliction, they lead to grief and misery, and to pursue those things that are wholesome, right? So he was very clear pointing out those first breaking those first four precepts are related to actually unwholesome tendencies in our mind. So this desire to kill, desire to steal, the desire to hurt somebody sexually, the desire to lie, that he was very, very like category. Usually not. Sometimes he's categorical, sometimes not. But for the precepts, he was very clear, very categorical. These are always based on some unwholesome root. And so if we act out on those unwholesome roots, we're good. Even if, let's say, it benefits everybody else, we're going to be afflicted by that in some way. And so that's so with that protection for ourselves is for that. It's just so that we don't. So it's almost like we don't pollute our own minds. We don't start encouraging those habitual tendencies in that direction.
Any other questions or comments?
I have more of an observation. The more you practice these thoughts as a lay person, the more you kind of, it's almost a little isolating because you find that there's a lot of stuff out there that's not kind and not generous amongst even your own friends and people you work with. So how do you, like I said to someone, I'm meditating, they go, I can't do that. That's the first thing they said. I said, well, that's cool. No, I can't. And I'll say, no, you can. Type A's can, you can. So it's very hard to kind of get people on board to thinking the way you do or acting the way you do. And it can be a little isolating sometimes, or I don't know. How do you deal with that? Did that ever happen to you? Obviously, you've changed. You know what I mean? How do you deal with that?
I guess I'll go
Each of
first.
you,
Yeah,
how do
yeah,
you
sure.
deal with
They
that?
get to hear from me all the time.
Okay,
so-
okay, I'll share. So the question is, a Buddhist practice, sometimes what can happen is it can feel isolating because, the things that we're interested in, for example, meditation, other people may not be so interested. And if you try to say, hey, why don't you try it out? They're like, oh, I can never do that. And so it's like, how do you deal with that kind of isolation or feeling like you're the things you're interested in are more alone and more disconnected from others? Yeah. Is that yeah, sure. Okay. So yeah, I remember as a lay person, so of the five precepts, the one that I had, I don't want to say the hardest one I had trouble with, but the one that I decided to agree to last was the fifth precept around not taking intoxicants. And part of that was because it was like, oh, I I can't, I really love these things, they're great, I can't, not good. But over time, I started to become more confident in the teachings, and I was like, wow, sounds like he has a point, and I said, okay, I'm going to do this, um, and one of the things I found, of course, was that okay, I'm no longer drinking, I'm no longer taking recreational drugs. But boy, all my friends, almost all my friends are still doing that. And in fact, what I found is pretty much most of the gatherings um, involved alcohol. It was almost like I started to realize, oh, they're actually getting together more to have alcohol and less about to hang out with each other, Um, and I still really value them as friends. But I made this commitment, and so I was okay. I'm going to spend time with them, even if they're drinking. I won't drink. And then I was like, you know, hanging out with them when they're drinking, and I was like, boy, this is really weird. This is not so fun. It's not so pleasant. And after a while, I just decided, I don't think it's really worth it anymore. What happened was I just realized that other things in my life, like like for just a really simple example, just like meditation. I started thinking, wow, I guess I could hang out with them, or I could go back home and meditate. Um, and I started rather just do that. Again, I still enjoyed spending time with my friends, but I just this is not the way I want to live my life. I didn't find it particularly valuable or fulfilling. Um, and so I think a part of the way I dealt with it was just by, that just kind of really contrasting the actual experience of spending time with people. Not that they're bad people or anything, but just, is it actually that fulfilling? Is it actually that helpful for my happiness and well-being? Or would I rather do other things? And of course, if you can find other people that are more interested in the same things that you're interested in, and of course, one of the nice things about being connected to a Buddhist monastery is that there's probably at least one other person around here that enjoys meditating and Buddhist practice, and so it's a lot of this is just finding other people that you can kind of connect with. So that's just what happened to me over time. In fact, actually, that's what I ended up doing the last 2 years as a layperson. I moved to Boston, and I remember looking for a place to live, and I was searching around, and didn't like this place, didn't like that place, and eventually found a place that was literally next door to a meditation center.
It's interesting.
And so I was like, wow, okay, I'll take it. And so that was great because I can spend a lot of time meditating, and I met a lot of really great people, right, that were interested in similar things that I was. So yeah, and again, it's not that I didn't value these friends. In fact, there's some that I've recently had conversations with and met, but it's you start to value other things more.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, I agree with what he said, but I would also add to that as he was pointing out, to seek making new friendships with people that you do have a greater sense of commonality with. But also with your existing friendships, sometimes it's a matter of actively looking for the good in those people and really trying to focus on appreciating the good things about them and praising the good things about them and connecting with them on that level. And then the other things, well, you just don't talk about that with them. So just in a simple example, like if you're really into wood carving and you know that Jason actually doesn't care the slightest bit about wood carving, well, then don't talk about wood carving with Jason. But if you know that Jason really likes painting, well, then you might talk about painting with him. It's a very mundane example, but it's like, well, okay, so your friend doesn't want to talk about meditating. Well, that's fine. Find something wholesome, something good that does interest them or that they do engage in, or just some aspect of their personality which is wholesome that you can appreciate. And usually most people, they have some amount of goodness in them. And it usually doesn't take that much searching to find it. And then you can appreciate that and focus on that.
Can I say something? Yes. Yesterday, Bhante asked me, right, what I see that was different, right? On my, remember you asked me a question like, what I have seen that was different from this, like what I'm experiencing now, from other experience in my life. And this was such important question, and I have been thinking, and based on what both of you said here, this is like on my, I'm the beginner, right, on this path of Buddhism. But the other experience that I have, spiritual experience, like, let me put the name, right? But I don't want to label, right? Like, but for example, in Christianity, right? So there are so much this idea of others being sinners, or we are sinners because we're not doing, like you're drinking, you're taking drugs, or you have misconduct. So like, oh my God, it's a sinner, right? So there is so much pressure on this, on creating this division. And now when Bhante said what you said, it's so beautiful because I don't feel like, I feel like in Buddhism, right, what I'm experiencing is that there is more space for us. And all the time you're saying my, I didn't feel fulfilling. You didn't say like that person's bad, right? And now Bhante said, and Sadasa saying, yes, there is goodness in other people, right? So there is this space for us not to feel superior to other people because we're doing meditation or we're here. And there is no like this push to create division. So I think this is so beautiful because the other, my experience, right? I don't want to just or create labeling about other traditions, but there is so much pressure on what like we are good, you're bad, right?
Sure.
You're a sinner, and so much when you make mistakes, and I did many, right? It's like the confession and the sinner and this, right? And I feel here that it's like it's our responsibility, right? Let's change.
One thing I find really delightful is the stories of the past lives of the Buddha. So before he became the Buddha, he was an ordinary person like the rest of us. And there's these stories, hundreds of them, of the past lives of the Buddha. And some of these stories are probably fictional, and some of them are probably half true, and some of them are probably true. And it's not always easy to tell which is which, but that's beside the point. The point is that in these stories, we actually see examples of the Buddha to be making mistake after mistake after mistake. And I actually find it really encouraging because it's like, oh, he wasn't any different from us. He also made mistakes. He also did foolish things sometimes. He also did things that were not so good, not so appropriate. But the point was that he learned from those mistakes and he kept trying to become better. And eventually he was able to completely perfect his own mind, completely purify his own heart. And so it's exactly the same with me. It's exactly the same with you. And it's exactly the same with everyone that we meet. So every single person that you meet might be a Buddha someday. So you can see in them they have exactly that same spark of absolute purity and compassion that a Buddha has. It's just maybe some of us, we need to do a lot of work, and some of us need to do a moderate amount of work, and some people they're really close and they just have a little bit left. But every single one of us has that same potential, that same seed of Buddhahood within us. And I think the young man in the back had a question.
Yeah, my question doesn't pertain to the talk at all. Like the second time I've done this. I'm sorry, Bhante, and with Bhante's Vanessa too, but I wanted to ask it anyways. So I guess it's somewhat rudimentary, but my question would be for particularly in meditation practice, what I found that's really helped me is labeling, mental labeling. And I was initially, I didn't really do that, but then I kind of discovered it, and I'll explain a little bit, I'll explain that a little more. By mental labeling, I mean kind of like when you are involved, in meditation with kind of an amalgam of presence, where you assimilate both the mind and the body, and you're focusing on sensation. Um, Labels like see, hear, and feel in the mind, I find really help me. And I initially thought it was kind of diametrically pervasive to like restfulness. Why am I creating mental talk when I'm trying to, rest my mind entirely? And I forget where I stumbled upon it. I think I was listening to like a Shinzen meditation or something, but he explained that the labels were, or he argued that the labels were kind of analogous to a finger pointing at something in which you kind of signify the salience of the object in question, as opposed to, or as in like when you're pointing at something, it's not the finger that you're focusing on, it's the object or the matter that it pertains to that the focus is emphasized on. So I was wondering, what do you think about adding those labels to my practice, especially when I find like my mind is exceptionally distracted. I've been super busy. I like to use those sometimes when I'm trying to focus on the body or auditory or like noting whatever. And then sometimes even if I'm really over the top, I like to, if my situation allows for it, even speak those labels a couple of times to settle my mind. And I've noticed when I do that, I can end up meditating for like 20, 30 minutes, which I almost never can do. Otherwise, so yeah, I guess that's my question. What do you think of mental labels?
So for the live stream, the question is basically, what do you think about during formal meditation using labels? For example, if please correct me if I'm wrong, but basically, if the mind is, for example, in thought, it would be like thinking. If it's like hearing something, it's hearing. If it's feeling something, it's feeling. Is that what you're doing for labeling? And that, and even when it's very agitated, you actually say it out loud sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if you're agitated, you say it out loud to kind of bring yourself back to the practice of sensation.
Right. So basically, what do I think? Well, it sounds like it's working. Great. I mean, from for myself, I use you can call them labels, or just kind of mental thoughts for certain types of meditations to encourage certain qualities of mind. For example, I was on a retreat recently, and I was using quite regularly 2 words to help my mind and develop qualities. The 2 words that I was using was trust and gentle, and because and those seem to help. And so yeah, I think again, and I think the main thing about any sort of meditation practice is you're not you're not doing it like kind of hyper constantly, but over time you're getting a sense of, is this leading to my mind becoming more collected and settled and stable?
Yep.
Is it bringing up brighter states of mind? Is the mind happier, more uplifted, right? And that can give you a sense of, oh, it's probably going in the right direction. And similarly, again, this is over longer periods of time. If it's sort of getting really kind of more agitated and really spun out, or you're starting to feel really like, really angry, or then you can say, okay, well, maybe is this actually appropriate? And so it's really important actually to use that kind of wider discernment around our meditation to see if what we're doing is appropriate. And also it's important not to like do that. How do you say? Like, you do that in a meditation, and then you maybe reflect afterwards. Not to just like okay, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? Not like that, but do your meditation after an hour or whatever the period of time, or 20 minutes. Then at the end you go, oh, okay, what was that? How did that go? And then next time you can adjust. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, briefly, what you're describing sounds very similar to the Mahasi method.
Yeah.
So you're familiar with this already.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. So if you want to dig into that, I'd recommend reading more about the Mahasi method, the teachings of Mahasi Sayadaw. This was his main focus, and there's a lot of people who practice in that way. So I don't necessarily think it's useful to only use that method and nothing else.
Right.
But as one method in a larger toolkit, it can be really helpful for many people. I don't personally use it, but I know people who find it really helpful.
Thank you.
And we're actually running out of time. And you had
That's
a
it,
question?
because my question was about meditation. It seems like I have the answers, because I found myself using different type. Like sometimes I do affirmation, sometimes I'm just. I was thinking if I'm doing something right, or if there's, I don't know. I would just want to make sure if there's. I could never understand, because when I'm learning about the teaching, it seems like there's a different method of meditation, but I just don't know the difference between them. And I found myself doing different ways, different type of meditation. I just want to make sure that I'm clear about them, so I guess I'm gonna learn more about it.
Yeah, well, there's, I think actually what Venerable was saying a moment ago about
Yeah.
evaluating the effects on your mind. I think that's what's really important. The method itself is actually not so important.
Okay.
It's what effect it has on your mind. That's what's important. So in Buddhist groups, you'll find people talk about literally hundreds of different ways to meditate.
Yeah.
And so it's actually fine to try many, many different methods. And what I actually recommend to most people is don't rely on only one method. Have at least 5 or 6 different meditation methods that you can switch between, depending upon what is most helpful to you at any time. Because our mind is constantly changing, so that means our meditation practice needs to be flexible. We need to have an adaptable meditation that can adjust to the needs of our mind. So yeah, it's good to learn many different methods and experiment with different ways of meditating and watch how it affects your mind. And you'll also start to learn when to use which method, and which methods are useful most of the time and which you use only under certain occasions and so on. So just keep exploring. It's actually a lot of fun. Exploring how to train the mind, it's a lot of fun. And we're out of time, so I think we can go ahead and conclude at this time. Yes? Okay. So we'll end the session with 3 sadhus. Sadhu.